Okay. Donald Trump has two very big problems tonight. One is that he appears more exhausted and more confused than he has ever been before. And everyone but the diehard Kool-Aid drinkers, members of his immediate family, I guess, and of course, Grandpa himself, seem willing to acknowledge that. And I'm just talking about what we see with our own eyes when he's in public, with cameras rolling. I mean, take yesterday during his Oval Office press gaggle. You can see it right there on your screen. Trump appeared to be nodding off over and over and over again. And at this point, you can pretty much take it to the bank that if Trump is sitting in a big padded chair and he has to listen to someone else talk, he's going to take a little cat nap. Not only is Trump clearly more tired, which he seems to be, he also appears more and more confused. Now, I'm not going to pretend I'm a math wizard here, but I think we can agree it is concerning when the President of the United States decides that math is just going to work differently now.
Under our most favored nations agreement, we've secured gigantic discounts with price differences from 4 to 5 and even 600%. 600%. I took a lot of heat. I'd say 500, 600. But we also say sometimes 50%, 60%, different kind of calculation. 70, 80, and 90%. And people understand that better. But there are two ways of calculating it.
Now, despite little Howard Lutnick nodding there in the back, it's really hard to explain what a 700% reduction exactly looks like, unless Trump's saying he's going to pay you. But that's Trump's math, everyone. Lots of numbers, but, without all the math to bog it all down. And look, Trump has always had his own preferred vision of reality. But all those catnaps and nonsensical answers seem to be catching up with him. Because now a majority of people don't think he has the mental capacity to be president. And the poll I'm about to show you hits especially hard because of who conducted it. A little up-and-coming outfit, you may have heard of them, called Fox News. They asked voters this question: do you think Donald Trump has the mental soundness to serve effectively as president? That's a pretty direct question. As you can see on your screen right there, a majority of those voters, 55% to be exact, said no. Majority of voters told Fox News Donald Trump does not have the mental soundness to serve effectively as president. And that's a big problem for Trump, the guy who claims I alone can fix it. It's a big problem, obviously, that a growing majority of Americans don't think he has the mental capacity to serve as president. But even as that number continues to rise, and trust me, it probably will continue to rise, Donald Trump will be the last person to get the message. Because even as he nods off and grows increasingly detached from reality, he'll continue to think that he can still bend reality, or even middle school math, I guess, to his will. And that brings me to the other huge problem for Donald Trump. He's still completely overestimating his own power. I mean, Donald Trump has gotten himself where he is today in large part due to his limitless ego, where he thinks that by sheer belligerence, he can just do whatever he wants. And I guess in some ways that worked for him for a while. I mean, he is sitting in the Oval Office, but it's not working anymore. He can't do it with his made-up math, and he certainly can't do it with his war of choice against Iran. Remember what Trump was doing last week? I mean, in a roughly 24-hour period, he said the war was going swimmingly. He said that Iran had agreed to never close the Strait of Hormuz again. He told Axios that he expected to deal with Iran in the next day or two. And he even told CBS that the Iranians had agreed to everything. Well, here we are. None of that has happened. Turns out it was all complete BS. It's the same thing that we've seen over and over again in the nearly 2 months since Trump started this war.
We've won. Let me say, we've won. You never like to say too early you won. We won. We won the bet. In the first hour, it was over. They want to negotiate. They want to negotiate badly. I don't think they're ready. Just on what I'm hearing. They want to negotiate badly, as they should. We've already won. The other side, I can tell you, they'd like to make a deal. I don't like to say this. We've won this. This war has been won. They're begging to make a deal. They're begging to make a deal. We've won. Whether you listen to the fake news or not, They'd like to make a deal very badly. Very badly. They have nothing left. They're going to make a deal.
See, Trump never even entertains the notion that the other side may have cards to play or leverage they can use against him. That has clearly been the case throughout this disastrous war of choice in Iran. but it's also the case in his attempts to recklessly wield his power here at home. I mean, back in July, Trump demanded that Texas do a mid-year redistricting of its congressional maps in order to reshape the map to favor Republican candidates, drawing out districts that have traditionally been represented by Democrats. Trump claims he and Republicans were entitled to those seats. That's how he put it. And reportedly dreamed that his redistricting push was part of the first steps in a large plan to give him a 100-seat Republican majority. That's what he was aiming for. I mean, it took a few months, but eventually Texas pushed through to Trump's new map, and Trump just thought that'll be that. He'd steal a few seats, Democrats would roll over, and he'd keep his majority and build on it. But what Trump and his Republican allies didn't anticipate is that their power grab would have consequences. Turns out Democrats didn't roll over. Democrats fought back to even the playing field, first in California, where Governor Gavin Newsom spearheaded a push to put the question to voters last November in order to match the advantage Republicans had achieved in Texas, seat for seat, until after the 2030 census. Meanwhile, Trump continued to pressure Republican-led states to enact his redistricting demands with some mixed success. In Missouri, Democratic pushback has slowed Republican redistricting efforts to a crawl. In Indiana, it wasn't just Democrats who pushed back. Republican state senators also rejected the new map Trump was proposing. And now Trump's campaign of revenge to unseat the Republicans who rebuffed him in that state, well, that isn't going so well either. And this week, Trump was dealt another stinging defeat in the mid-year redistricting fight that he began. Because on Tuesday, Virginia voters approved a new congressional map that could flip as many as 4 seats to Democrats. So now, Democrats have essentially erased whatever advantage Republicans were hoping to gain by their scheme. Trump vastly overestimated his power to squeeze more House seats out of red states through his redistricting scheme. And he also underestimated the will of his opponents to fight back. And that pattern also extends to Trump's crusade against Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Trump picked Powell, remember, during his first term, and he has been basically trying to force him out because he won't give up the agency's independence and give in to Trump's demands to lower interest rates. The Fed is independent, of course. Now, ironically enough, this whole saga kind of started last year with a dispute again over math, when Trump accused Powell of spending too much on the renovation of the Federal Reserve's headquarters.
So we're taking a look, and it looks like it's about $3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed.
Yeah, it just came out.
Our notes had it about 3.1 as well.
3.1.
3.2.
This came from us?
Yes. I don't know who does that.
You're including the Martin renovation. You just added
our entire capital.
Yeah, you just added in a third building is what that is. That's a third building,
Well,
including
no,
the
but
Martin building.
it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
It's part of the overall work.
But it's not new.
So we're going to take a look. We're going to see what's happening.
Again, Trump seems to have a questionable relationship with numbers and data, which is one way to put it. But this is actually about the fact that he isn't able to fire Powell simply for refusing his demands to lower interest rates. So he's been trying to portray the cost overruns of that renovation as an example of government waste, and in turn paint Powell as a fraudster and destroy his public reputation in the process. That's the goal. Now, that renovation of the Fed's headquarters, of course, became the pretense for the bogus investigation into Powell that was launched by Trump's DOJ. But the probe was such a sham that even outgoing Republican Senator Thom Tillis wouldn't stand by the Trump administration's intimidation tactics. As a member of the Senate Finance Committee, he pledged to block Trump's nominee to succeed Powell as the Fed chair, Kevin Warsh, until the investigation was dropped. But it was a threat that Trump did not seem to understand.
And you think Kevin Warsh can get confirmed? You think Thom Tillis is going to give you a vote?
Well, we're going to have to find out. He might not, but that's why Thom Tillis is no longer a senator.
Okay. On the AI
Thom Tillis is no longer a senator, right?
Well, he's on his way out.
Well, no, he quit, but he quit. And I think he doesn't want the legacy of stopping a person who could be great.
What did I say Donald Trump's two biggest problems were? Oh, yeah. That he's tired and confused, and he's overestimating his own power. And in that clip, I think we saw all of the above. Thom Tillis is still very much a senator, and he won't budge. And wouldn't you know it, just today, Donald Trump's Justice Department dropped its criminal investigation into Jerome Powell. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman of New York. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee and a former federal prosecutor. Okay, I have so many things to ask you about. I want to ask you just about a little bit about what I just talked about, because one of the things that seems very clear to me is that Trump overestimates his own power and underestimates his opponents, and that may lead him into political trouble, but it also leads us into prolonged conflicts and sometimes even economic challenges. Do you agree with that? And if so, how do we kind of get out of this cycle?
Yeah, but Donald Trump is, like many mob bosses, of the view that he will threaten, and if that fails, he will threaten more louder. And that's how he operates, to try to batter people into submission. And the reality is that may be able to work when your approval rating's at 60%, and everybody understands that you have a lot of political power and capital. But it does not work when your approval rating is at 37%. It does not work when you start to sound mentally unsound, when mentally unstable, and when you start to say that a sitting senator is not a senator anymore and that you don't need him to pass your nominee. The reality of the situation is Donald Trump far overemphasizes and exaggerates his own power. I think part of it is that he's somewhat drunk on the notion that he has convinced his base that what they saw on January 6th actually didn't happen. So he now believes that he can literally convince everyone of whatever he wants them to believe, even if it is clearly not the case. And he's run into a lot of trouble in recent months because of that.
No question about it. The mob boss, example. It always hits home. It seems always under the nose. I want to get your reaction to Trump's Justice Department deciding to drop its investigation of Fed Chair Jerome Powell so suddenly. I mean, Trump has been doubling down on this. Obviously, it's been an issue for Tillis. What do you make of that after so much public defiance from the president?
Well, what I make of it is that if anybody, on the Republican Party especially, would stand up to Donald Trump, he'd fold. And he did fold because he doesn't have as much power as he thinks he does. He's not as influential as he thinks he is. And the consequences are not nearly as bad as people suspect. But it also says one other really important thing, Jen. It doesn't take a lot of Republicans to have a spine and to stand up to Donald Trump and to change what he does. Tom Tillis is one senator. They needed his vote to get Kevin Warsh through committee and onto the floor. And he is an outgoing senator in large part because, as we suspect, he did not like what the Republican Party was becoming, and it was moving away from him and toward Donald Trump. But rather than normally what you would do and stand up and speak out, he just decided to retire. And that's the reason why he feels, I guess, sufficiently bold to stand up in this particular case. But it doesn't take much. And I wish it didn't require retirement for Republicans to stand up and do what is so clearly right. This investigation was bogus from the get-go. It was obviously an extortion effort. It was a shakedown to get Jerome Powell to lower interest rates by threatening him. And the fact that Tom Tillis has now recognized that and is the only one should not actually be celebrated. It should just be observed as to how many other Republicans have not done that.
The politics are so clear here and obviously this is a completely bogus investigation. But knowing how this administration operates, is there any legal, could Trump just change his mind and try to force U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro to start the investigation up again? Is that even possible?
Well, that's what Donald Trump does all the time. He has made it very clear with Jim Comey, with Letitia James, with John Bolton, with Adam Schiff, the list goes on. He is directing the Attorney General, acting Attorney General now, Todd Blanche, of what to do, who to prosecute, who to investigate, based on who are his political enemies, not based, of course, on any evidence. And the fact that Todd Blanche has now said publicly that he has every right to do that completely belies everything the Department of Justice has stood for. So in the ordinary course, what you would see, and we have seen many times because there have been a number of prosecutors who have resigned instead of doing Donald Trump's partisan bidding, is that he's now found people like Todd Blanche, like Jeanine Pirro, who will do whatever he tells them to do. And that's so, yes, certainly if he were to tell Jeanine Pirro, do this, jump, she would say, how high?
They all want to keep their jobs or want bigger jobs, which seems to be the big motivator here in a lot of ways. I want to ask you just about FBI Director Kash Patel. I mean, that guy has always kind of had a hell of a week, but he's really had a hell of a week. I mean, he's suing The Atlantic, and reporter Sarah Fitzpatrick, he's suing her for her bombshell reporting. We talked with her about this just last week, about his behavior on the job, including, of course, allegations of excessive drinking. He's denied everything. But Sarah Fitzpatrick is now not only standing by her reporting, and she's consistently done that, she says she's since been inundated by additional sourcing, going up to the highest levels of the government, providing additional corroborating information. And that basically means that even how buttoned up law enforcement, the FBI, and others typically are, lots of people are reaching out to her. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me what I suspected for a long time, and in fact have some inside knowledge about, which is that the line FBI agents and the good men and women who have dedicated their lives to fighting crime, keeping our country safe, tackling terrorism, counterintelligence, are fed up with their derelict and incompetent director, who has just brought disrepute and shame on the FBI, both in his own behavior, which now clearly includes excessive drinking on the job, even to the point where he had to be woken up by someone banging, a SWAT team coming to bang through the door, but also just in this partisan politicized environment that he's in, even to the point now where, the Atlantic journalist has to worry because when the New York Times wrote a story about his girlfriend and all the extra benefits that she was getting from the FBI, he then started to investigate her. I mean, that is beyond inappropriate. It's a complete violation of the rules and the law. And that's exactly what he does in retaliation. So there's no question that I would put my money with The Atlantic every day of the week, 100 times out of 100 over Kash Patel. And he just had another suit thrown out, another defamation suit thrown out. This one's going to get thrown out too. But it's just the way that Donald Trump and his acolytes act, which is we're just going to ratchet things up. And ultimately, they think they will beat everybody into submission until there's a groundswell of people who will stand together, as with the survivors in the Epstein files, and say, no, we're not going to bow down to you. We're not going to yield to you.
And people are starting to do that, and he's underestimating the forces against him. Okay, we have to take a quick break. You know how this goes, but I'm going to ask you to stay where you are. Thank you for your generosity of your time. And I want to talk to you after the break. I mean, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, you already name-checked him. He's also a former colleague of yours. He just attacked you by name, as you all know, all because you criticized one of the most outrageous things we have seen from this Justice Department to date. And I'm going to talk about that, and I want to ask you about that after a quick break. To understand why the Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche is attacking my guest tonight, you need a little bit of a backstory. And the story starts 45 years ago, when a couple of Alabama lawyers founded an organization aimed at protecting the rights gained during the civil rights movement. They called their group the Southern Poverty Law Center, and through strategic lawsuits, including one over a horrific lynching in Alabama in 1981, the SPLC succeeded in financially breaking the modern Ku Klux Klan, even forcing the KKK to turn over its national headquarters. Now, in the decades since, the Southern Poverty Law Center has tracked hate groups around the country, sharing many of its findings with the FBI. until Trump's FBI Director Kash Patel ended that partnership just last year. And this week, Trump's Justice Department indicted the SPLC, accusing the organization of fraud. Now, the indictment alleges that the SPLC deceived its donors because money the organization paid to informants inside white supremacists and other hate groups was actually funding those hate groups. That was the argument, which I would note is an insane thing to argue. Now, more importantly, here's how an actual lawyer, our friend, former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, sums it up. She said, quote, "The Justice Department wants us to believe that one of the nation's leading civil rights groups, the people who broke the Klan and continue to expose the white supremacist groups that crop up in its wake, is actually supporting racism and domestic terror, that they're in fact responsible for whipping up the frenzy." Now, if that sounds like a deeply warped, messed up stretch, well, Joyce is hardly alone among former federal prosecutors in thinking the case is likely to fall apart once it hits an actual courtroom. But a legal victory may not be the point here. The acting attorney general, who is Donald Trump's former personal lawyer and desperately wants to be the long-term attorney general, the formal final one, he accused the SPLC of, quote, "manufacturing racism to justify its existence." And the White House is echoing that. The White House press secretary is now referring to the 2017 White Supremacists Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville as the Charlottesville hoax. That's what she's calling it. That rally, at which a counter-protester was killed and dozens more injured, and several white supremacists were held criminally and civilly liable for violence, was apparently a false flag operation funded by the Southern Poverty Law Center or something like that. That's their argument. And our friends over at Fox News are saying the indictment shows that the real racists have always been the anti-racist black activists who invented racism as a way to go after white people. Okay, that's their argument. There you go. And if that is not far enough out on a crazy offensive limb for you, President Trump is now claiming that this indictment somehow proves what else? That the 2020 election was stolen, which is, of course, a big freaking hint as to what this actually might be about. Congressman Dan Goldman is back with me to talk about all of this. Okay. My colleague Steve Bannon, who's brilliant and writes the Maddow blog, laid out the chain of thoughts Trump appears to be following to get from the SPLC indictment to the 2020 election this way. They're facing criminal allegations. They're progressive. Progressives opposed Trump in 2020. He lost that election, therefore, threw out the results. Is that their argument, I guess? Or what do you think this is all about?
Well, the other way I was thinking about it is that they are responsible, really, for undermining and exposing many white supremacist groups. Well, we know that January 6th and the riots were fomented, facilitated, and executed by white supremacist groups. So is it now that he's saying, well, because the Southern Poverty Law Center actually was, quote, feeding the frenzy, which I think is a great comment by Joyce, that they are responsible for the riot on January 6th and whatever happened thereafter? It's so insane, Jen. It's just insane. The only thing that rivals it is the absurdity of this indictment.
Acting U.S. Attorney General Todd Blanche, you overlapped with him at SDNY, and he picked a fight with you on social media about this criminal indictment. I have so many questions here. Like, is this who he's always been? What is going on here? What is that about?
No, I mean, that's, and I'm not the only one who worked with him at the Southern District who is absolutely shocked and alarmed by what he has become as the leader of the Department of Justice. I worked with him for many years, had no inkling. Well, I didn't even know what his political background was because that was not something that was ever at issue. But he was a straightforward, straight-shooting prosecutor. And the notion that he, of all people, would be doling out these politicized orders, these such clearly partisan and evidence-less orders and investigations and indictments, is bewildering to just about everybody who worked with him. But everybody I speak to is just alarmed and incredibly disappointed because he has really helped to take this Department of Justice into the sewer. And it's not going to end right after, it's not going to resurrect itself as soon as Donald Trump leaves. This is really destructive, and it will have lasting and permanent damage, and it is on Todd Blanche's shoulders.
And he desperately wants to be the Attorney General, so there is that. Congressman Dan Goldman, thank you as always. Okay, coming up, as viewers of the show are well aware, Donald Trump's top negotiators on Iran are his real estate buddy and his son-in-law. That still continues to be the case. And as viewers of the show also know, both of them have massive conflicts of interest in the Middle East. Well, we just learned they're headed back to the Middle East to negotiate on Trump's behalf. Rob Malley was Barack Obama's top negotiator on the Iran nuclear deal. Barbara Starr is a legendary former Pentagon correspondent. They both know a lot about a lot, and we have a lot to talk about after the break. Or how effective lead negotiator J.D. Vance will handle high-level talks. Friday predictions about a breakthrough in talks or how this war is resolved have become kind of par for the course throughout the course of this war. And this Friday is no different. The Trump administration announced today that the nation's top real estate/peace negotiators, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, yes, those two guys, are traveling to Pakistan for yet another round of peace talks with Iran. And Trump, of course, is already hailing the talks as a success, telling Reuters that, quote, Iran plans to make an offer aimed at satisfying U.S. demands. I mean, that would be great, but we've heard that prediction before. We'll find out very soon if that's actually the case. But unlike the last round of peace talks with Iran, it won't be Trump's top Iran negotiator, Vice President J.D. Vance, calling the shots.
We hope progress will be made, and we hope that positive developments will come from this meeting. The Vice President, I understand, is on standby and will be willing to dispatch to Pakistan if we feel it's a necessary use of his time.
Now, according to the Washington Post, the decision not to send Vance reflects the lower level of these talks after the last trip failed, which is very normal in negotiations. The Iranians, likewise, will not be sending their top negotiator. Does that sound like we're hours away from a breakthrough? I don't think so, but I have the perfect two people to ask. Joining me now is the former special envoy to Iran under President Obama, Rob Malley, as well as longtime Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr. Okay, Rob, the real estate duo of Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who have been the lead negotiators, they're headed back to Pakistan tomorrow. Obviously, negotiations continuing is certainly a good thing, but there's always these Friday predictions about how this is just about to end. J.D. Vance is not going as of now. That, and I guess any other tea leaves you've been looking at, what does that tell you about the state of things and where they are right now?
Unfortunately, Jen, it doesn't tell us much at all. I mean, you know, the U.S. position is that the Iranians have been begging for these talks, and that's why they're sending Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. The Iranian position is they're not even going to be any talks, and that we're just there to convey our position to the Iranians, and then the Iranian foreign minister is supposed to leave. So we could spend our time excoriating the identity of the U.S. negotiators and some of what's coming out of the White House. I think the real question is, what is the U.S. position? Is it a position that is sort of completely disconnected from reality, not understanding where Iran is, and just going through these juvenile tweets and these juvenile, you know, the rhetoric that's coming out of there, or is this a serious negotiation? At this point, it doesn't look like the latter. It looks like we're still in for one more round of fruitless talks and perhaps cover for military operations, because it's not inconspicuous that we now have 3 aircraft carriers that are in the region. That's the highest concentration of forces since 2003. It's probably not for nothing that they're there.
Let me ask you, Barbara, about what Rob just said, because you've covered, you've watched, you've seen indicators of kind of increased military action for so many years. As you've seen movements of troops and equipment, what is your assessment about what that means in terms of preparations and what could be next on that front, to Rob's point?
Yeah, I think he's exactly right. Presidents typically, departments of defense, do not deploy that level of firepower and the tens and tens of thousands of troops unless they are at least prepared to use them. So not an empty threat. to say the least. And, that's what we're talking about. 3 aircraft carriers, that's going to be roughly 30,000 troops right there to man those carriers and their air wings. There's going to be aviation in the region to conduct intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance if airstrikes resume. There's going to be all kinds of U.S. military and intelligence community assets there. But I think one of the big problems is once you devote that much to a specific region, you have to keep it up. And that's tough to do. It's a very labor-intensive process. And the big question always, especially in the Middle East, how does this end? How do you know when you've actually achieved the goals you think that you're going after? How do you know when you have, how do you know when you've won?
I mean, that seems to be the question we don't know the answer to, and we haven't known the answer to. When you look at this, Robin, you've actually obviously been leading, you've led these negotiations like them in the past. Do you think that Trump underestimated? It seems like he did, and there's been reporting suggesting he did, kind of what the Iranians were willing to hold out for, what leverage they had. What do you make of that?